Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Cambridge Union for our sex education panel event. Just a quick few reminders before we start the event. You'll have to keep your mask on throughout the duration of the event. And if you'd like to ask a question, we ask that you be seated at the end of your rows. If you're not, if we could ask that the people at the end of the rows kindly move over if somebody wants to ask a question. Thank you all for being here. The coronavirus crisis has rapidly changed how we view relationships, sex, and intimacy. As a result, students are looking for answers in this tumultuous time more than others, and we hope that this panel event will be able to give some guidance and insight into all of these questions to develop connections for both new and established relationships. How do we navigate this reality and use technology for pleasure? I'd like to introduce our panelists. Dr. Anand Patel, seated on the right, is a GP based in Inner London who works at the Centre for Men's Health on Harley Street, London, treating sexual dysfunction and testosterone deficiency. He speaks both locally and nationally on behalf of the British Society of Sexual Medicine and co-hosts the Pleasure podcast, which focuses on sex, relationships, and intimacy. Nurse Sarah Mulindwa on the left is a qualified nurse and star of Channel 4's The Sex Clinic. She specializes in sexual health and relationships, and in addition to her work in television and media, Sarah practices at one of London's busiest sexual health clinics. Sarah also has a background in fashion as a stylist and was fashion editor of the 1883 magazine. Joining us from Zoom over there is Hannah Witten, who is an award-winning sex and relationships YouTuber and author. In addition to her YouTube channel, which has attracted over 80 million views, Hannah hosts a popular podcast and has written 2 books titled Doing It and The Hormone Diaries. Regarded as one of the UK's leading young voices, she is best known for a candid and open exploration of intimacy, disability, body image, gender, and sexuality. Thank you to all 3 of our guests, and I just want to reiterate that this is a safe space. Respect, confidentiality, and consent are fundamental principles of this event, and we aim to make this event inclusive of all sexualities, genders, structures of relationships, and disabilities. Audience members can feel confident to express any of their concerns and opinions, ask whatever questions you may have, and share their own individual experiences. We will be sharing resources at the end of this panel, and I'd like to reiterate that this is a judgment-free zone. All right, so with all of that, let's start the event. Depending upon where you're located in the UK, government advice also allows established couples who don't live together to meet up for sex after, but casual sex is still banned. Because of this, one of our overarching questions today is how can students utilize technology for pleasure, and how do you recommend students get started with this? Let's hear from you first, Sarah.
How would I recommend students
get started with utilizing technology for pleasure?
Okay, so I think now more than ever, because of everything that's happened with coronavirus, we're spending a lot more time at home, we're spending a lot more time on our phones, and also we don't have access to each other the way we normally would. I think the best way to do it is to find forums and maybe places that have been recommended to you by other people. Check that they're safe, check that they're registered online, check that they've got reviews of how safe they are as well. And in terms of exploring sort of dating apps, maybe. I know for some people don't like dating apps, other people are kind of used to them. And I think, because I worked on a project recently with Badoo, which is one of the biggest dating apps, and they're sort of changing the way that they work in order to adapt to this new way of living. Because young people, well, everybody now, we can't go out the way we used to and meet people in the traditional sense of, of how we used to, which was already challenging a little bit before even coronavirus. People were already sort of finding it harder to connect, just by going out, and people depend a lot more on online dating, whereas now it's almost, it is now pretty much the only option, especially as we go into winter months. So what I would suggest is do your research online, whether it's to do with dating apps, whether it's to do with even things like porn sites. Speak to people about it, even in your group chats. I think openness is always the best policy. Oftentimes we might want to do things like, going on dating apps or even watching porn, but we feel like we don't want to speak to anybody about it. we feel like we might be judged. What I would say is speak to the closest friends around you, and see what other people might recommend. The good thing about online is that you can find communities even outside of your friendship circles if you don't, because you shouldn't also divulge, share information that you don't want to share with people, so you don't have to speak to everybody about it. But there's so many forums online that you can go to where you can find like-minded people who can recommend certain things. So I guess it depends on what you're used to, but never be shy about opening up the conversation, because all of us have certain needs, and you'd be surprised who else is out there. The internet can bring us so much closer together. So it might just be a matter of a Google search or something like that, or on Instagram. There's certain pages. There's a lot of sex positive influencers now, so the market is really quite wide in terms of the options that you have for people who you might look up to, and what channels that they might get involved with. I know some people like things like Pornhub, but I also know that a lot of people don't like things like Pornhub, but there are other sort of niche things that you might get involved with. So I'd say don't be shy about going online and speaking to people. Join forums. There's a lot of Facebook groups. There's a lot of groups that are being set up, and just see what works for you.
Yes, thank you so much. On the subject of online and sex-positive influencers, Hannah, I was wondering if you were able to speak on recommendations for people going online on the first time, and how to tailor their searches for things like sex toys or porn sites.
Oh, good question. But first, can you all hear me?
Yes.
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 We
Okay,
can hear
great.
you.
Yeah. So I think online can be really great, but it can also be a minefield, especially if you're looking for this kind of information for the first time, and especially you've got like social media sites, but you also mentioned porn, and as much as I always want to be an advocate for paying for your porn and ethical porn, I know that is a privilege that not everyone can afford, but there are still ways to be able to use technology and access whatever material that you want to, and kind of unfortunately sometimes you have to look at it with a bit more of a critical lens. But if you're like going to these sites and going to these platforms because you want to get aroused, that kind of like more critical side of your brain doesn't necessarily want to be engaged in that moment. So it might be a case of before like sitting down when you're not actively like wanting to look for adult material online, in order to have like a solo sex session. Before that, doing a bit of research when you're not in that headspace, so you can kind of have a bit of a critical eye for it, and just a lot of it is like gut, especially if you are going to be on like free porn sites, is kind of figuring out what sits right with you. I don't know if that like answers your question, but also just in general on social media, there are so many amazing sex positive, sex critical accounts on Instagram. I would just like start by following a few, and then suddenly you will see that they all like tag each other in things, and it will start coming up in your recommended more. If you have a look to see what hashtags people are using, then you can go to those hashtags and like find other accounts as well.
Amazing, thank you so much. In terms of online dating and dating apps, Anand, could you perhaps speak to giving advice to students who perhaps don't feel comfortable using dating apps, how they can seek out company, relationships, and sexual satisfaction during the pandemic, but perhaps maybe not through Tinder?
So, well, firstly, thank you so much for having me here. I'm very grateful to be here and to be asked. I'm too old for Tinder, so I would start with that. I've been in relationships for 11 years now, and the way that I found my partner was through Guardian Soulmates, or Shelf Mates as he calls it. And he sent me a message, and I said, "Who is this jug-eared muscle Mary?" that is sending me a message. He's completely not my type. I don't know what I like, and I didn't know then what I liked. But 11 years later, and I'm still there, and he's still there. But getting there has taken a lot of work, and it was in a very different time in lots of different ways. AIDS was still in my head. When I was a young man, I got through the letterbox, I was a kid. I got through a letterbox, basically a little leaflet, thanks for Maggie Thatcher, with a picture of a gravestone and AIDS written on it. And I thought, I kind of like guys, so I'm going to die. And so for me in my head, sex and death are interlinked, and that will never go away. It's getting better, but it's never. So for example, I have never had unsafe sex. That is part of who I am because of my experiences. And I think about when we, sorry, forgive me for, I'll answer your question in a second, but I think one of the key things that we need to know about ourselves as human beings is our love maps. Now, John Monet talks about this. He was a, I think, Canadian psychologist in the 1970s. It's about how he was really sex maps. How do we generate that idea of what we want sexually? And it comes from, well, the first people, and I know this sounds weird, but the first people that model relationships to you, which is your parents. Okay, so if they like shouting at each other and then they aggressively hug afterwards, I don't mean aggressively hug in a kind of euphemistic way, I mean aggressively hug in a kind of, it's all very drama and then all very sort of powerful emotions. That can be what you expect. It's a kind of Disneyfied way of relationships, a very Hollywood way of relationships. Otherwise, if they don't touch each other in front of you, that was my experience from quite a religious Asian family. So there was no touching. We got the occasional hug, but it's more a kind of side hug, a bit of shoulder, a bit of pelvis, but not too much pelvis. And that was kind of the sort of emotion that was showed to you. So that was my view of what tactility meant. And then you go and look what your friends are doing, and what the sexual experiences they are either having or lying about, whichever one is more likely to be true at any particular time. Then what media is saying, what's culture saying? Are you particularly religious? Because people that have a particular issue with porn or pretend to have had a background where either their culture or the media has been very negative to it. If you've actually had quite a secular porn upbringing where perhaps your parents weren't particularly negative about it or were happy to talk about sex, you are more likely to have a good experience of porn. So it really does matter where you come from. When you generate your love map, so we move away from sex and stuff and look at your love map, you're looking at all the relationship structure that you want to put on. You will, when you see that picture on Tinder, you will apply all of your love beliefs to that one person. So you say you like this picture of this hot, whatever, whatever you choose to find attractive, you will apply that, I bet they like high emotion interactions, they like loads of cuddling, etc., and that will be your expectation. They will ultimately fail. And that is then the point for you to decide to either compromise or walk away. So you may all have friends already who always seem to have 3-month relationships. They and you're like, why is it always 3 months? What happens at 3 months? For me, I call it the reality check moment. It's where the dopamine in your brain drops down low enough that it's not giving you basically sort of cock-blocking blindness. Basically, you kind of see the person for who they are. And you're like, I don't like the fact they pop on my dick in bed. That's just me. I don't like it. Whereas you didn't see it before. Apologies if this is people watching this who are just thinking, what the hell? And Mum, don't watch this. She never will anyway. She lives on an ashram in India because they're very religious. If you are applying your judgments to this person, they will fail. Therefore, recognize that in advance. Try and be a bit more open-minded about it. And that applies to the people that you're looking at on apps. If you are choosing to look at an app, you are surfing. So what you're doing is you are, dopamine, as far as I'm aware, I'm willing to be corrected, but dopamine is a chemical in your brain, which I'm sure you all know, that allows you to, it's the thing that drives you to try and search for something. It's your hunter mechanism. So if you're seeing a whole load of people, you are flicking through your dopamine, you're really powering that up in your head. It's the same as when you're watching porn for 3-minute videos. You're really powering through that dopamine, searching for that next high. Which means the reality of someone who perhaps might be squishier than the people in those photos or in those videos that you've been watching, or the fact that actually sometimes, they do leave the toilet seat up, or the fact that they want something different to you is a real compromise to make. Now, if we try and then extrapolate that to situations where you have, oh my God, no human contact necessarily, because you're either in a lockdown or you're in a bubble, and you're being advised that actually you're not allowed to have physical contact because you can't reach outside your bubble depending on what stage of lockdown you're in. That must be incredibly challenging. So I fully, for those of you who are not in sort of long-term committed relationships where you're allowed access to each other, as you are, I think, from the current rules, unless there are other goes going down, that can be very, very problematic. So trying to use apps in that manner, I mean, the things that I've heard that have been super charming to me, but remember, I'm a middle-aged man talking to a much younger audience, your version of charming may be super different, is people setting up things like WhatsApp or FaceTime dates. And actually, I've heard of people sending like a £10 voucher, and the other person buys a bottle of wine. And then they go and sit with each other, and they plan time with each other. Now, I recognise that is not super sexy spontaneous. I really get that. One hopes that we will get there to the point where actually you will be able to be with each other and bump uglies and do whatever you want to do at that point. But at the moment where you can't be together, you can still have a relationship. Now, I had a pen pal. Now, that's not a relationship, I grant you, but it was a relationship that had value to me, and I never even met the person. Okay? We are sort of designed to make links with other people. So be open to that. And be open to the fact that the person you're making links with may not initially look like you expected them to. I think my partner may have hoped I went to the gym a bit more, and I don't. I hoped he would know a little bit more about, say, Sige Marjan or Dior, but Matthew can't even spell Dior because he's dyslexic. So, the issue is about trying to find someone who really works with you to evolve, and I appreciate that's super difficult. So I think I would just say be open, and I mean that in all senses. If you are not certain of your sexuality, if you're not certain of your gender, if you're not certain of any of these things, why not play? Okay? These are opportunities where you can kind of, I'm not saying play with people's emotions, or because all these interactions have costs and values, even if they're not, oh, really, I'm so sorry, good Lord. Sorry. It's my therapy alarm. I'm not having therapy this week, because obviously I'm doing it here now. Yeah, I'm kind of lost with that. I'm going to stop now.
No, just going back to what we were speaking about upstairs in terms of things like dating apps, because I was saying sometimes I don't like the idea of just sort of swiping right just based on what somebody physically looks like, because if I think about people that I've dated before, on paper they wouldn't be maybe the person who are, but after getting to know them, they become the most attractive person, because actually a person is a whole human being outside of just their physical appearance. So I think now more than ever is the best time to give each other a chance and just start on friendships as well. It doesn't have to be like, oh, okay, are we going to date? If you meet somebody and you have a really good conversation, really good rapport, just, keep that going, nurture it, look out for each other. And even, like you said, having a pen pal, this was more common, I remember, even when I was in school as well. It was common to have pen pals, and you would have friends who would check up on you, and, you check up on them, and you'd never met, but you really build these, these meaningful, deep relationships. And if that then progresses into something, then that's amazing. But I think now more than ever, we all, as human beings, it's the most basic need for us is to connect with other people. So if you go into something just as a friendship, if it develops into something, that's great. And if not, you've gained a really good friend. So I think just being open and sort of pushing yourself out there a little bit into whether it's messaging someone on social media that you maybe, you might have met before or you've seen online that you quite like. And you never know the response, because everybody, I think we're sort of in this society, in this space now where everyone's kind of like doesn't want to make the first move. We all have this kind of, there's a sense of pride, and we don't want our egos to be bruised a little bit, but that person could just be waiting for you to, and eventually somebody has to kind of make that move. So I think now more than ever, as we restrictions sort of become a little bit tighter and we go into the colder months, I think you've got nothing to lose. You've got nothing to lose. And sometimes even if the person's not interested, it's fine, you just go on to the next one. It's yeah, I think just be open to meeting new people.
I think that the real thing is about shame. There is such a sense of shame or failure if the person that you really like or think you like, because you like a picture. So how on earth do you actually really know that person? But I fully get that thing of really wanting something that you have no idea who they are. I mean, I did, and this is going to sound really wrong, in Select magazine, 30 years ago, they used to do personals ads. And I thought that would be the safest way for me to talk to another guy, because I didn't want anyone to know, and I didn't want to go to a bar because I didn't think that would be comfortable for me, because I didn't want to put myself in that space. So I would send out a letter with my picture in it, and it would be sent to a PO box, and then it would get distributed to some person. And, I put 2 ads in, and I got, the most ridiculous number of responses. But they're not to a photograph, they're literally to 15 words I wrote in a row. So all these people have written me long letters about their hopes, their dreams, the guy they hope to meet, and a photograph that they hope that I will find attractive. So everyone is searching.
They put their love map on you.
Sorry?
They put their love map on you.
Exactly. Well, and I think it's very bold. I think it's incredibly generous to do that. I think it takes a real sense of spirit. I think it takes the sense that I may lose, I may fail, I may be thought of as not very attractive. And it's that thing about sending a photograph that I was sending. I had no idea. I was sending photographs of me pulling some random face, and I was going, oh, I'm not getting any responses. That's right. But these days, people are cultivating their photographs. Their advertising is top-notch these days. Everyone's got like Beauty Plus or whatever app you have to make sure your blemishes are completely disappeared. I do that too. I'm just making sure my face doesn't look quite so round. But whatever it is that you think you need to narrow, like your nose or whatever you think that isn't as beautiful as you want it to be in this bit of advertising, that I think doesn't do you any favors. Particularly not if they're meeting you for the first time. Okay, particularly if not if they're seeing you on a screen. I recognize that the idea of advertising is to get you in the store, but you can't meet these days. At the moment, you can't meet. So I would try and be as real as you possibly can be. The time I got the most responses from my gaydar profile, this is so back in the day, was when I just wrote, I literally don't want pictures of overstretched orifices, please. I don't want pictures of large members pumping into things. I don't want stunt penises or stunt arses. I don't want any of that. I would just like meet someone and have a coffee with them and fall in love. And that is obviously deeply naff, and I've said that aloud. However, the number of responses I got just simply from people going, that will never be my profile, but I'm so glad someone else wrote what I'm thinking. Yeah. Okay, and I tried to chat some of them up and they were not interested. But it was very much about them reaching out, just saying, I actually want that, but the way I feel I need to advertise is this to get what I need. So I would try and be as honest as you can be, because at least you know that the people responding to you are the people that find that attractive. Because otherwise, what's the point?
I think you both also make a really great point about how right now is a really good time to practice experiencing rejection. Because it might feel like the stakes are a bit lower if you're just interacting with people online, and maybe there's not as much of an investment because you've not met in person, so you've not quite figured out if there is that kind of chemistry that is there. But experiencing rejection is something that we will all go through, and it's something that we all fear, and it's also something that gets a lot less scary the more you experience it. And there's a lot of things that we hold back on doing. There's a lot of things that we want to do, but we don't for fear of being rejected. But once we realize that, yeah, rejection, it stings, it does, but it's not the end of the world. And when somebody does reject you, in whatever capacity that might be, the way that I try and frame that in order to kind of like help myself move on from it a bit more is actually thanking them for being honest, and also being grateful for the fact that they felt like they could be honest with me, because also we don't live in a society where it's really easy to say no to things. Like, we do not make saying no to things easy at all, whether that's like hanging out with a friend or in a sexual context. And so if somebody is able to say, oh no, I'm not interested, or I don't think this is going anywhere, then that's also taken some confidence on their side. And so yes, it hurts, but also just be like, thank you for letting me know.
Instead of ghosting somebody, yeah, absolutely. Right? You'd rather, because I think ghosting is also something that's very common nowadays, because it's easy to just sort of block somebody because you just don't want to have that awkward conversation. But I'd rather feel the rejection and know that, okay, at least you've given me a valid reason. But when you ghost somebody, not only are you telling them that you're no longer interested, but then you're giving them that added bonus that you don't care about how they feel. And so whenever I talk to young people about, relationships and how to approach it if you're not interested, and just be transparent. It's better to hurt somebody with the truth for a short time than to leave somebody sort of hanging, and then all they'll end up doing is dissecting every part of their looks, their personality, which can be so damaging on an emotional and psychological level, to a point that people don't always appreciate how that can, make somebody feel. But like you said, I think, rejection is something that we all go through. Nobody's free from that. And I think once you realize that, and you think, I'm never going to be every single person's. And also, it's not always about you not looking the right way and you not having the right personality. Sometimes even when I look back at certain situations, like where, I didn't, either I rejected somebody or I wasn't interested, it wasn't because of them, it's because I wasn't in the right space of, I wasn't in the right frame of mind, I wasn't in the position where I should be dating. And then I look back on it and I think, God, that was a really great person. So oftentimes it's not really about you when somebody rejects you, it's also where that person is at a particular time in their life. So it's also, when you're dating and, meeting people online and stuff, it's important to remember that you're also going to meet people at different stages. And it's tedious and sometimes it can be boring and exhausting. But sometimes you do have to just keep putting yourself out there, and everyone will meet somebody. Every tin has a lid.
But if perhaps we move towards the point where now we're actually interested in each other, rather than being rejected, you've actually met someone that finds you attractive, and you find them attractive. And I think that's really important, that actually attraction still is important. We do talk about trying to give people a chance, but at some point there should be at least one feature about them. It could be their intelligence, their hair, their nose, or whatever it is that you find attractive about them. At least find something about them that you really want to be around. Now, once you're in that space where you've got the opportunity, it's about, at the moment, I'm afraid it's about planning. Yes, you can send texts throughout the day, you can send pics. Be careful. I mean, I appreciate that there are people that will want to mine your pictures. They will want to collect your pictures, and not for the right reasons. Okay, there are websites full of pictures of unsuspecting men, women, whoever, that have just been supplying photographs for this. However, let's presume that you've got someone that you trust and that you're happy with, sending basically sects all day is basically like having the Argus simmering constantly. It's delightful. It's like setting your genitals on simmer. Okay? Your brain is going to be absolutely bathed in a sort of joyous sort of mixture of chemicals. And I appreciate that's a really dumb way to make horny sound. But that's what it is, okay? So you've got this simmery bubble of chemicals. And then, frankly, if you do get to the point where you either want to have phone sex, because that's a lovely, safe way of doing things where you don't necessarily feel you can actually look at each other at the moment, actually using your imagination to think about how the other person might look or feel, or exploring your own body during that moment to actually allow yourself to be non-genitally focused. Because so many people are all about, right, well, you kind of do this nipple, then that nipple, then you go down on them, and then you penetrate, and that's how you do it. And you're kind of like, well, actually, there's a whole lot of body that may be in an erogenous zone. So there's something called sensate focus, where if you decide to go and spend a pleasurable half an hour with yourself or an hour, don't touch your genitals or your nipples. Go for other regions of your body and try and find out what works for you. You might need to be in a quiet room. You might need to make sure the door is locked, because I recognize that the majority of you will not have the luxury of living in your own homes or your own flats or accommodation. So making sure that's closed, or there's a chair stuck in the door and there's Vaseline on the knob on the other side so no one can get through the sucker. Or even put like a sign on the door, I am masturbating. Fuck off. Okay, well, that's actually what we teach older couples to get their children out of the bloody house. Is say they're having sex. There's no quicker way to get your children to move out. But if I go back to you need to be in a safe place where you're comfortable with your body. If you're having phone sex, you can have that on the speaker, but you can have your headphones on, which means you've got a whole two hands to be going all over whatever you want to do, unless you've got three hands, which is very exciting. But you've got lots of body to explore, lots of fun to have. Then if you're happy with each other, video is obviously super exciting. That just adds another exciting dimension. Remote-controlled sex toys, hello. Imagine receiving one of those in the post. I appreciate, be careful. I imagine if the porters pick one out, that might be a bit dodge. Particularly it's one of those that switches on during transport and they think it's something more incendiary, which obviously be a disaster. But you can get remote, sort of radio-controlled, wireless-controlled ones that people can run them from their phones. And actually, you're on the other receiving end of it. I mean, obviously, if you're during one of your seminars or something, or a tutorial with you, that might be inconvenient, but also it might be super hot. Sorry, I'll stop talking.
Yeah, so actually I did want to touch on quite a few what you were talking about regarding phone sex, regarding spontaneity, and what you were talking about, Hannah, regarding fear of rejection. I was wondering if any of you had any advice or insight into suggesting phone sex or dirty talk, and similar to what you were saying, Sarah, about like the fear of perfection, how can we not let our head get in the way of our sexual pleasure, whether it's with ourselves or with a partner?
I think sex is as much psychological as it is physical, and I think if you sort of build certain things up in your head, it's naturally it's gonna interrupt everything else. You have to sort of let go of your inhibitions and everything. I think it just takes practice, and I think it takes the right person as well. And when you're dating, that's, you know, if you're dating somebody who you feel comfortable with, you've kind of had that conversation, then it's easier to sort of let go of your inhibitions a little bit and explore certain things with somebody that you feel comfortable with, somebody that everyone knows their boundaries, everything's consensual, there's mutual respect there. And I think that's the best way to sort of approach that. Of course, as moving forward in terms of dating and stuff, and everything is pretty much going to, especially with, you know, you guys being at university now, you know, you're in a smaller sort of town, and you don't have the access to each other as much as you would have. But again, things like Zoom dates are really great. Then you're not sort of depending on just sort of a picture on someone online. You can actually, because I mean, I hated Zoom when we first started, but now I'm so used to it. Like, it's fine. I just, you know, you kind of adapt to it. So have Zoom dates, talk to each other, like try to build a rapport. And I think especially with women, we're a little bit more complex in our approach to sex. It's very much emotional as well as physical for us. So I think finding a partner that sort of understands you, makes you feel comfortable, and doesn't push you to do things you're not comfortable with. But again, that sort of takes time, and just give yourself that time. You know, don't worry about rushing into things too quickly. It takes time to build a rapport with somebody that you feel comfortable with in order to do that.
I think suggesting things like phone sex or broaching something in a relationship, that comes up so much. And one of the easiest ways that I found is to have a third thing that is the focus, so it doesn't feel like you're necessarily bringing it up out of nowhere, but maybe there was like a scene in a TV show that you watched, maybe there was a podcast that you listened to, maybe there's a talk that you have attended, and so using this other thing to kind of go, oh, what did you think of that? And then also something that Anand said as well about play, and about really just not taking it seriously. And when it comes to trying new things and suggesting new things, not doing it in a way of like, this thing is going to be really great and we should do it because it will make our relationship better, but just approaching things with curiosity and like everything is an experiment. So it's like, why don't we try this thing? It might be terrible, but let's just give it a go and we can debrief afterwards. So I like that kind of like curious experimental approach to things because it also doesn't put a lot of pressure on it. But then just general tips for like phone sex. It literally is, it's not that complicated a science. Describe what you want to do, describe what you are doing, describe what you are going to do, describe what has been done. There you go. And you don't have to use fancy language, you do not have to be a poet. It can be just as straightforward as describing, like, I am verb to body part. And it can literally be as simple as that. And the context of the moment, not just like the exact words that you're saying, but the interaction, the dynamic, the laughter. It's absolutely okay to laugh. That can be like what makes it really hot.
I think phone sex is I mean, of course, it's incredibly safe, which is a nice thing for lots of people. It can be somewhere where you can, I mean, it's certainly when I was on Gaydar, there was actually a chat room about phone sex. You know, you could actually talk to other men that wanted to have phone sex. And that was, it was astonishing, but it also makes you realize that there are all these tribes of different sex acts or different ways of communicating sex that exist out there. And two of the most commonly popular were the cyber sex room and the phone sex room. So that's always been a popular thing and a theme that's resonated with young people particularly, and a way of connecting with people where you might not know that you're attracted to the same sex or not, or whatever, and actually trying to find these places where you could potentially talk to someone and sound that out and have that sort of fantasy sex that you're not certain of is an amazing exploratory thing to have, because a lot of you are in the position where you are, some of you may be already quite committed in your sexual journeys, but others of you will be starting out in those sexual journeys, and actually having the broad-mindedness to go, I don't know what I really fancy, so I'm going to try out today being, I don't know, a passive gay man. Or, I will be a straight man, whatever it is that whoever you want to be. And I'm not trying to do that by saying you should try all these individuals and you should not care about their feelings, because the people you are practicing on are individuals and humans as well, and some of them might be you at the other end of the phone call. Some of them may have develop feelings for you. Not generally during one phone call, unless it's a spectacular phone call. But I mean, and they can be ridiculous, and they can allow you to fantasize. One, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm going to say it anyway. The first time I ever tried phone sex, they wanted me to pretend I was really rich, and so I said, they were like, "Oh, what car do you have?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't really drive. My friend has a Golf," and I realised that I was meant to pretend, and my nature is to be entirely truthful about this, which is why it's so embarrassing all the time, being me. However, he clearly wanted me to be saying that I've got loads of money and I've got this amazing home and I drive a, I don't know, God, I can't think, a Lamborghini or whatever it is that he wanted me to be saying. But instead, I couldn't do it. And it was a disaster. I mean, literally it was a disaster. He hung up and blocked me. So it was an utter disaster. But the issue is, I got over that, and I find it hilarious now. I've got a friend who turned over in bed with his partner and knocked her out by accident because he was trying to do some sexy move, and accidentally he knocked her head against the sideboard and knocked her out for 20 seconds. Now, she, luckily, thought it was hilarious afterwards that he was trying to be sexy, and obviously she's lauded over him ever since. But it was a disaster and potentially not ideal for her brain. I will say that with my doctor's hat on. Please be careful of sideboards and other accoutrements around. You don't want to get impaled on anything that you don't want to be impaled on. But it is really important to actually just recognize it's silly, it will go wrong. And better it goes wrong kind of where you're not necessarily looking at them and the shame can't really be seen in your face than it goes wrong. I mean, it's going to go wrong inevitably anyway. I mean, I've been with my partner for 11 years, it goes wrong. Sorry.
Yeah, I just want to switch gears a little bit and talk about safety regarding sexual wellness. Are clinics still open? What advice would you give to people who've never visited a sexual health clinic before and are concerned perhaps about either embarrassment or coronavirus concerns or not really knowing what to do? All of those things.
So sexual health clinics are still open. I think a lot of clinics have reduced, depending on if we go on a lockdown like we were a few months ago, there'll be a lot of restrictions. So unless you have symptoms or you need something called PEP, or you need emergency contraception. So if you need emergency HIV care if you've been exposed to HIV or if you've been exposed to pregnancy risk, what we're doing in the clinic where I am is we're sending out medication to people. So we'll do consultations on the phone. Unless you have symptoms or have something that needs to be physically examined, then everything can be done sort of from home. And the good thing now is that there's home test kits, so you can order test kits at home. They get delivered, you send them off, you get your result within a few days, and then they text you your result, and then they'll send you your medication if you're asymptomatic. So it's still doing that. If ever you need any sort of emotional support, anything that you feel like I need to speak to somebody like a professional about this, then there's always support. There's always support you can go in. In terms of the COVID risk, we are having, we're putting everything, restrictions are in place, so we can only have so many people in the waiting room. So if you do go to a clinic, just be assured that we are taking all the precautions to keep everybody safe, to make sure that everyone's fine. We take your temperature when you come in. We make sure everybody uses hand sanitizer. All the staff also wear protection as well. And in terms of sort of feeling, you know, a little bit ashamed and a little bit embarrassed about going to the sexual health clinic, which is completely normal, by the way. It's normal. Sex is a very personal thing. It is your body. It's very private. So it is normal to feel like that. So don't feel ashamed to feel like that. But what you should remember as well is whoever you're going to see, whether it's a nurse, whether it's a doctor, whether it's a health advisor, everybody who's worked there has chosen specifically to specialize in this particular field. So they're not going to be approved. They're not going to be judgmental. There's nothing you're going to tell them that's going to make them think, oh, you know. So walk in there knowing that, A, whoever you're going to see has chosen to work in that field, and whoever you're going to see in the waiting room is there for the same reason. So really, there's no real reason to feel embarrassed or ashamed.
It's a great time to hook up because you know they've been treated.
Yeah, then you know whoever you happen to meet there, you know, okay, well, this person's responsible and they're actually taking their sexual health seriously, you know, and they're a responsible adult. So yeah.
I love that as a meet cute.
For sure. I think I'm going to open the floor up to questions now. So if anybody's got any questions, just raise your hands. I can't fully see all of you, so let me just scan around. All right. You in the shawl.
Thank you. To whomever wants to answer, but you mentioned the 3-month threshold where things sometimes start to go wrong. I was wondering if you would have something to say about the 2-year threshold.
I can't quite say where everyone's threshold falls. I mean, some people, they get to the point where, you know, the dopamine drops and the oxytocin. So the oxytocin is sort of the love drug. It's the part that makes you feel bonded, and often you feel that when you're very tactile with another person. You also feel that when you've orgasmed. So it's a very bonding experience, orgasming. It's why men fall asleep, because actually them smelling you overnight and being in your arms is one, a sign that they don't feel threatened by you and feel very close to you, but also they will be smelling your scent all night, which is a very bonding experience. For the woman, that they may want to talk, and that's a slightly different thing because you're kind of going, why the bloody hell isn't he awake? And the issue is actually because he feels safe. And so if that oxytocin isn't going up quickly enough, and your dopamine is falling quickly, you will get to a point where actually it's too low to sustain a relationship unless you make the effort to keep on going. Now, I'm not talking about desperation, but there are lots of reasons to be in a relationship. Sometimes they're sexual, sometimes they're attraction-based, sometimes they're monetary. So sometimes it's security. You know, there are lots of reasons, and there's lots of reasons why sex happens between two people. Sometimes it's because of relational. It's to maintain the intimacy, not necessarily because you find them attractive. Okay, it's a very complicated set of reasons. So when I say 2 months, it can be anywhere between 2 months to a year to maybe 2 years in some people. Generally, if the longer it is, it's more the fact that actually you're realizing that your love map doesn't meet their love map. Okay, because the initial bit is probably potentially hormonally driven. You're not necessarily that compatible. The later bit is more the fact that actually your expectations of what this relationship is and their expectations are incompatible. Or incompatible at that moment in time. You know, I mean, the right person at the wrong time is still the wrong person, unfortunately, as trite as that phrase sounds. And that's made me feel a lot better in lots of circumstances myself, because it's not easy. But wherever the relationship breaks up, all relationships have ups and downs. Sometimes you'll have a period of 6 months where you're not particularly sexually interested in the other person, or you might not feel like they're the person for you forever. But actually, you can wade through that. Alternatively, you might decide, actually, this is time to call it quits. And these are difficult, big decisions. And if you don't think you have the ability to have that conversation, it's like the conversation about sex. If you can't even talk about sex, why are you having it? You know, talk about the relationship you want. You know, I think it's really important to not renegotiate relationship. You're not writing a contract every few, but perhaps we should be. Perhaps we're going actually every 6 months. How are we in this? Are we both as devoted as it needs to be? Is there just a bit of work that we need to do? And there is work. It's not easy. You know, it doesn't come out of nowhere, but if you were attracted to them in the first place and you had good sex when it started, often that's a great place to remember back to. You kind of go, at the beginning, 3 months ago, it was hot. You know, I know that we've had a drop-off of the hormones then, but perhaps we can think about that and hopefully we can build up the rest of our relationship to match what our sex life was like. Or alternatively, your sex life could be not necessarily overly inspiring, but actually that's not the main thing about it that's important. It's your connection, it's the intimacy, it's the intellectual bit that really stimulates you. There's loads of reasons you stick together that are not just about how good his abs are. Although abs are good. But not actually.
I think it's a really good point about how there's so many different reasons why a relationship might end, but I'm just love mapping, projecting onto your question, because I think the kind of like cultural narrative of the like 2-year, 1-year mark is that you have less sex and there's less desire in the relationship. That kind of tends to be the narrative that we're sold. But also that's what a lot of us experience. We're like, oh my goodness, it's true, it's happening to us. And one of the things that has personally really helped me is actually learning about how desire works, and how for a lot of us, especially cis women, desire isn't something that just comes out of the blue and that we're just like, oh, I'm in the mood for sex now. But desire is actually something that comes after arousal, and desire actually has to be triggered by something. And so one of the best things that you can do in any relationship, but like obviously specifically long-term relationships, is create the context and create the environments in which desire can like appear, rather than sitting around waiting and hoping that it'll appear one day, because you will be waiting for a very long time, maybe forever. But it is about like figuring out what are the things that turn you on, in terms of like psychologically, touch, but also like your environment. Things like stress and tiredness can really impact your ability to feel desire. And then just like spending some time going, okay, let's foster this environment, but with no pressure for it to lead anywhere, because desire does not perform under pressure. And so if you are able to take 10 minutes, 30 minutes, kind of similar to what you said about the sensate focus as well. Although with sensate focus, the idea is to like, do not touch your genitals. But with this, it's about going into it with like willingness to explore what feels good mentally and physically, but with no pressure for it to lead anywhere. And what you may find is that it doesn't lead anywhere, but you had a really great time and you feel connected, which often is one of the reasons why we want to have sex. But a lot of the reasons why we want to have sex can actually be fulfilled by other things. But also, it may actually lead to you then feeling some desire. So that's obviously lots of different things can happen in long-term relationships that might make it rocky for whatever reason. But if you think it's a desire issue, then learning about how desire works, honestly, game changer.
Yeah, so sort of going off what both of you were saying, I was wondering if anyone could give some insight or advice into communicating sexual desire, or communicating your preferences, or trying something new, perhaps a kink, in either long-term relationships or more short-term relationships, like a friends with benefits type thing or a one-night stand.
So is that for any of us to answer?
Yes.
Oh.
Sometimes I feel like with the people who are, less, it's easier to bring it up with.
Yeah. I think
'Cause the
sometimes it's
stakes are
harder
lower.
when you put all your eggs in one basket and you really, really like the person and you hope that, that they're gonna like it. You just care a little bit more when it's somebody who you have feelings about. Whereas when it's somebody that's either a friend with benefits or just a one-off, you kind of you're more relaxed, and then you're less likely to feel sort of tense, and then you're more likely to probably enjoy yourself more. So it's interesting, yeah, that you said that, Hannah.
Yeah, I think it comes back to all of that fear of rejection stuff, but then also that like play and experimental stuff, and that idea of like using something outside of the relationship to prompt that discussion.
I think it's absolutely okay to have more than one sexual partner. So I want to say that as well. Not all relationships are structured as one. I mean, often they have one primary sort of relationship, and then there might be secondary ones, and your primary partner may not know about the secondary ones. I mean, I always advocate that it would be better that everyone is honest about this. A lot of gay relationships sort of often go through a phase of being open, so, although more often these days people are having conversations about them being open to start with. And that's equally possible in the heterosexual world. There used to be people had affairs or mistresses, and actually people were aware of that. That was a very functional way to have a relationship. It doesn't have to be thought of as something illicit or awful. If you find that you have sexual needs and desires that are not necessarily met inside your primary relationship, it's absolutely possible. I appreciate it's difficult to have that conversation going, by the way, I would like to insert X into Y with someone else, please. I'd like to wrap someone in leather and then pee on them, but not you, because you're too nice. And that's often the issue, actually. If you are very bonded to someone, you may not want to do something that actually might be more physically aggressive. If you're very bonded with someone, you might not see them if you are their carer in some ways, you're looking after them emotionally, or you're doing their coursework or whatever. It may not be the sexiest thing. So actually, you may want to go out of that to a very physical environment where you can be yourself. Now, the problem with all of that is I'm saying this in a coronavirus situation where we are not able to access those external things, but you can fantasize about them, and you can do that via phone sex. You can access it online. You can access chat rooms. You can access erotica. I mean, reading about sex allows you to experience it in a way that sometimes someone in front of you will never achieve that level of connection with you. Sarah Perry writes some incredible erotic literature. So, and you can get a lot online. And read the good stuff, obviously. You have to go through some trash to get to the quality, but some erotica is fabulous, and that can really allow you to keep in a prime relationship whilst having your side piece, because that's in your head.
Yeah,
I think you also bring up a
openness
really...
and transparency.
Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to, just reiterate what Adnan says, is that openness and transparency is the best way. As long as the other person knows and you're not being deceitful or dishonest or, cheating or manipulative in any way, and everybody sort of is aware of where they stand for, your partner may not want to go down that route, which is completely understandable as well. But I think just having that conversation, if you are having these feelings and wanting to explore, instead of just going off and doing that and sort of living a bit of a lie and going down that road, speak to your partner and see they might also be on the same page, or you might just not be, that might not be the right relationship for you as well. So just being open and honest, and going back to sort of, if you wanted to try out different toys and kink stuff, there's a brand called Love Honey, which is really good. I worked with them quite recently. Excuse me. I worked with them quite recently on a virtual event, and they're really good. They explain so much. They've got so many different options, and it's a good place to start, because it tailors to people who are sort of more experienced with toys and people who are just starting out. So that's always a good start.
And also, these don't have to be very expensive. These toys can start at £2 or £3. So you don't
just make sure you're getting a body safe one.
Yes, exactly. So get a decent one, and also the use of lubricant. Lots of people who are going to be masturbating aren't going to be using lube. If you could try and replicate the sex act you would like to eventually achieve. So, for example, if you're masturbating, use some lubricant. Loads of boys develop death grip, where they're literally crushing the hell out of their poor penis. And actually, there's no lubricant used. So how on earth could a mouth or a vagina or whatever orifice replicate that in real life? And that's why we're getting some people coming in with erectile dysfunction at a very young age, because they've been masturbating so furiously with such hard grip that they can't possibly function. So the idea is, use a bit of lubricant. You can use penile sleeves, and instead of using them on yourself, stick them between a couple of pillows and thrust in and out of them. Replicate the sex that you want to have with lots of lubricant that actually suits the sex toy you're using. Remember, you need to use specific types of lubricant, otherwise, for example, oil with damaged rubber, for example, including condoms.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all you have to do is blow up a condom and rub some Vaseline on it, and you'll see why those two do not go together. I was going to say, you brought up a really great point about, it was making me think about even within monogamous relationships, or if you're dating someone, there can be this real stigma about fantasy and masturbation, and that if you are in a sexual relationship, then you won't need to masturbate. Or if you do masturbate, you should always be thinking about them. And that's not the case. That doesn't happen. It may happen, and that's great. But also, if you have fantasies about other people, about different things, about stuff that you are not doing with your partner, like, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's something that you want. It doesn't necessarily mean that's something that you feel like your partner is like not giving you. Fantasy and like all of that is really complex, and obviously our solo sex can add to our partnered sex lives, and then our partnered sex can also enhance our solo sex lives. And it's not a case of I hear a lot of stuff where people think that their partner shouldn't be watching porn because it makes them feel like they're not enough, but that is not the case.
Yeah, do we have any last couple of questions from the audience before we wrap up? Yes, you in the black.
Hi. Kind of touching on what you've just said, I've got an app called Dipsia, and it's kind of like audiobooks, like erotica short stories, like all audio stuff, and it's really good, but I feel like it creates this infidelity fantasy that is desirable in many senses. So, I mean, I'm in a long-term relationship, and I feel like it almost tempts infidelity in the real world, and I'm not sure how to navigate that. And I think there's a massive bracket of that same infidelity fantasy within porn too.
As I understand it, the research, there's lots of research, but some research shows that 30% of people in a relationship fantasize about an open relationship. So you are not alone. I'm not judging, I'm not saying that's you specifically, but people are not alone if they are thinking about someone else adding something sexual to their relationship. But also, there's nothing wrong with wanting that. That is a viable, acceptable way. It's not particularly positively viewed in some sort of cultural or religious structures. However, those are kind of structures we're trying to impose on evolutionary biology. So it doesn't necessarily mix. And it's lovely that people want to be in long-term relationships, but actually maybe we're not designed for that. Long-term relationships have gone from being a relatively short period of time because we died when we were 35 to extending now till we're 80. So can you spend 60 years married together? I mean, certainly people's amazing anniversaries show that you can, but actually, do people now expect to spend the last 30 years of their life sexless in a friendship? I certainly have patients that have come to me, and I've given one of their partners, they've given the husband some Viagra, and the wife has come in 5 days later going, "Don't you dare give him those blue pills again." He just turns up with an erection in a bathrobe, and she's like, "What the hell? I haven't seen that for 20 years." Okay, so there's also things about expectation and about what people want to get out of it. So I think absolutely the things that we see that sell us these ideas of what we could have, like how it would be more pleasurable if we had more sex, if we had other people that were hotter. And we get that on TV as well, don't we? We get sold all these. It's really difficult to cut yourself away from that. However, the other way of looking at it is when you are curled up with the person that you care about most, you feel about how that makes you feel and about how they might feel were you to do that. And then it becomes a judgment call. Neither of them is wrong, but it's tricky, and I'm really sorry. I don't think I have found an adequate way of expressing that to someone and telling them why. I mean, the thing about fantasy that you were mentioning earlier, about how would you ask for it? I would have them in a non-sexual situation, perhaps, when you ask for it, and use a third-party inference, like you talked about before, about saying, actually, I saw this, or I heard this on a podcast. Take the sting out of, I want this, and it must happen. It's, we could try this.
There's definitely ways to have hypothetical conversations about sex and relationships in order to kind of gauge your values and your attitudes and your interests in things without actually making it a conversation about what are we going to do about this right now, but also about it being this ongoing conversation. So it's not like, how do I bring up this thing, and then you bring it up and then you have that conversation and that conversation ends, and then you have to have the anxiety about bringing it up again. But if there is this culture in your relationship of it's just this constant topic of conversation, I guess. But the thing with, I guess, infidelity or like relationship structures, we are, you know, from a really early age, given this notion that monogamy is normal and that monogamy is just like what we expect from people and from what we want and what our partners will want. And there's this script and there's this box, and you follow down that hole, and it's not right for everybody. And how many of us have actually sat down with ourselves and then also maybe with a partner and said, if we could scrap everything that society tells us, scrap all of the monogamy, the hetero cis normativity, scrap all of that, and we built our relationship up from scratch, what do we want it to look like? What actually are the components? What do we want as individuals? What do we want in a partnership? And kind of like trying to do that again as like this hypothetical experiment exercise, I think can be really helpful. And not thinking of it as like, well, we're going to have this discussion and then we're going to upheave our entire life and change everything, but just more of a like putting out feelers and just like talking about how you feel about things, and like maybe you don't know, and that's also fine.
I think we've got time for one last question from the audience. Well, thank you all so much for coming, and thank you to our guests.